You can buy a V8 powered manual transmission leather wrapped Aston Martin for less than the price of a new fully loaded Honda Civic. But the question is, should you? This is our 2007 Aston Martin V8 Vantage that we paid $33,000 for. And no, that wasn't some special YouTuber discount. One of these cars just sold on Bring a Trailer in convertible form for under $25,000. Another on Cars and Bids for 35 grand. So for around 30 to 35 grand, let's be conservative, you can pick yourself a clean title, relatively low mileage Aston. That's crazy considering these cars were north of $120,000 when they were new. Now, full disclosure, folks, I might be a little biased in this video because this was my all-time dream car when I was a kid. In 2009, it was our second ever loaner car doing this whole car blog video thing, and I fell in love with it, as would you if you were a 12-year-old riding around in a new Aston Martin. So I have such a soft spot for these cars, and I can't wait to get behind the wheel. Except weirdly, I can't drive this car.
Tommy, people may be wondering, why aren't you driving the Vantage? And the reason for that is quite simple. When we went to insure it with Haggerty, they said that this was a supercar.
And they said under no circumstances is Tommy allowed to drive this car, which is pretty wild because I drive like a 95-year-old grandpa, but because the insurance has deemed this a supercar, I can't drive it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe back in 2007, 390 horsepower was super, but today, I don't know, Tommy.
It's funny, I could drive, you know, our Model 3 Performance, our Model Y Performance 0 to 60 in about 3 seconds, our Mustang GT with 465 horsepower, but 380, that's where they draw the line. They say no way.
You know, it might be because you're in your 20s, Tommy. That's what I'm guessing.
I think you're exactly right.
And I asked actually why they classified this as a supercar, and they said that people who have this tend to wrap it around a tree.
Yep, and they assume
not in that language, but I'm just paraphrasing.
Yeah, they assume that I would be in that same boat, which, look, most 20-something-year-olds would give them something with an Aston Martin badge, and there is a good shot it would be around a tree. So the V8 Vantage is powered by a V8, although they did do V12, which are considerably more expensive. Now, debuted in 2006, and the early cars like this one used a 4.3-liter V8 with 380 horsepower and 302 pound-feet of torque. And if you're thinking, that doesn't sound like a lot of power by modern standards, it really isn't. And actually, that was one of the complaints of these early cars, is they lacked some low-end torque. So shortly after production began, Aston actually switched to a 4.7-liter V8. The thing is, though, folks, 0 to 60 in 4.9 seconds is not going to beat any modern electric car, let's be honest. But you don't buy this car to beat a Tesla off the line. You buy it for the experience. And this is one fantastic experience of an engine. Now, these early Aston Martins had a little bit less power than the later cars, and they were criticized at launch for not having enough torque. This engine kind of revs like a Porsche 911 in that there's not a lot going on down low, but over 5 or 5,500 RPM, it really wakes up.
Yeah, I mean, it is a glorious exhaust note, and in these twisties, people say, you know, the rub on this was that the 911 was more of a sports car and this was more of a GT. I'm not feeling that, Tommy. I'm feeling, I'm feeling pretty sporty, except there's a Porsche that's in my way, so what can I do?
Kind of limited by the sporting potential here.
I am.
But look, this car competed with the 911 997 generation, which we've driven a couple of them at this point now. How do you think this compares?
Well, I mean, obviously this thing is sexy as you know what, whereas the Porsche is a 911, which is fine.
What a burn.
But come on, I mean, that thing hasn't changed in like 50 years. Here comes the exhaust note. You hear it? Oh, hell yeah.
Wow.
Wow. Okay, so, you know, it's not fast in modern electric car terms, but there's something so satisfying when the car kind of just wraps around your body and your mind just telegraphs what you want it to do, and it does it. And, you know, I get that people think that the 911 is, especially today, the ultimate dream car for a lot of people. It's got that, you know, German reputation for perfection, but there's something about the way the British build cars, which has a lot more character. It has a lot more, oh, dare I say it, fun. This is a fun car, Tommy, and German cars are a lot of things, but fun, that may not be a word I would associate with the 911, at least not in the same sense.
Look, I think if you get to like the 997 GT3s, right? Or that legendary 4-liter, those things are insane. But the standard 997 is a little bit of a letdown to drive, at least in my opinion today, because you expect relatively modern performance, because it looks like a relatively modern car and it doesn't seem that old on paper, but they feel a little lackluster unless you're right on the limit for a standard like Carrera 2.
Look at the brakes on this, Tommy. Look at that. No problem whatsoever.
So I think compared to a standard 911, this car is a lot more fun.
Yeah.
That engine is pretty magnificent.
Yeah. Oh, that thing just wails, dude. Just wails.
Now's the point in the video where you say, aha! But that's the reason these cars are so cheap, because of some catastrophic engine flaw, right? That makes them really unreliable. No! The fact of the matter is, this engine is based, loosely albeit, on the architecture of the AJ V8, which powered literally hundreds of thousands of Jaguars and Land Rovers and Range Rovers. And I know you're probably thinking that's not saying much, but it also powered several Ford products like the Thunderbird. Now, the Aston version was quite different than the AJ V8. It was actually hand-built in Cologne, Germany, even though this little sticker here says hand-built in England. But the engines came out of Germany, and they are genuinely super long-lasting. There are almost no major flaws known with this dry sump 4.3 V8. They just keep going, and as long as you do even basic maintenance, they just seem to last. So really, really good. The engine in this car is mated to a 6-speed manual transmission, which was actually quite a popular option. However, there was another choice. You could get these cars with something called the Sport Shift, which is a great name for a pretty lousy transmission, and basically they got rid of the stick with the manual transmission, gave it an automated clutch system, and then called it a day. So it's an automated manual. Now those drive a little bit like a drunken 15-year-old, and I would avoid those if you can. The later Sport Shifts actually got pretty good. Transmission may be the wrong word, because these use a transaxle. The transmission is actually located at the rear of the car. And once again, something I just couldn't believe until I talked to some experts, there are very few mechanical shortcomings with the V8 Vantage. This was developed in the Ford era of Aston Martin, and apart from clutches, which can go bad if ridden hard and put away wet, there doesn't seem to be a lot of issues. There's some small fiddly things that can go wrong in these cars that we'll talk about, but for the most part, they're really solid. So once again, why are they so cheap? Well, one of the problems, potentially, is that these cars are very expensive and very difficult to fix if they're even in minor fender benders. And that's because of the extensive use of aluminum. So make sure you find one of these that has a clean Carfax and ideally hasn't been hit to avoid expensive damage to this beautiful body. And by the way, I have never driven a more affordable car that gets more attention as this Aston Martin. It still looks to this day like a $100,000 plus car. Henrik Fisker, yeah, that Henrik Fisker, is largely credited for this design, and in my opinion, it might be the best design of the modern era. It is that good. Now, one of the reasons a lot of these old luxury or performance cars get so cheap is because the interior gets super outdated. The crazy thing is, this car doesn't look outdated. The extensive use of leather and the pretty much complete lack of screens means that it holds up remarkably well. Now, they did a few different interior facelifts in this car because they built it from the mid-2000s through 2017 or 2018 if you get the V12, but in my opinion, these early ones are the best looking of them all. And let's talk about some of the crazy features in here. Now, this looks like a really advanced feature for 2007, a glass engine start button. Except it doesn't do anything. This car has, you would call it an inconvenience in 2024. I kind of think it's fun. To actually start the car, you take a physical key, which is something you just don't see anymore with this crazy key design. Then you stick it in this slot, turn it to on. You don't twist it though. Then you come over here to the red glowing engine start button. It glows red when you put your foot on the clutch. and now you can start the car. How cool is that? This car does not have a modern infotainment screen like you'd come to expect in any modern car. Instead, it has buttons and switches and knobs for everything, and surprisingly, they are of very high quality. Even though this is a Ford era product, you'd expect them to cheap out, everything feels really good. It has a physical clock here, and I love the way these temperature knobs feel. This feels like an old Pioneer amp from the 70s, a beautiful metal knob. Even these little buttons down at the bottom have a really satisfying click to them when you push them. The whole interface feels extremely high quality. There is a failure point on these interiors though, and that's this little square right here, which appears to do nothing. This is actually a fold-up navigation screen straight out of 2007, actually straight out of a Volvo, and this has died. This can happen sometimes. I think the little motor gets stripped out over time and then it doesn't fold up, but really I'd rather have it down because that's just gonna really age the inside. And speaking of Volvo, there are two other places that Aston Martin part shares with Volvo. The first is down here, and that's the little switch panel for the windows and the mirrors. This is straight out of a Volvo. And the second is the key fob, which is just a straight up Volvo key fob. They actually leather wrapped over the logo. If you peel this back, it says Volvo. But genuinely, that's the only two bits I can find in this interior that are shared with other cars. The gauges in this car are stunningly beautiful. This brushed stainless steel look with a tachometer that sweeps the opposite direction to how you'd expect. Now, the reason that this still looks good today is it's not full of screens. Unfortunately, the two screens that are included are delaminating a little bit, a common issue on these V8 Vantages. I love all of the leather included in this car, including on these seats. It is really thick. It's looking a little lumpy, as am I, after some 20 years old, but it really has a high quality feel, especially with this contrast stitching, and they include leather everywhere on this interior. Even in places they absolutely did not need to, like this gap between the dashboard and the door is stitched black leather. How crazy is that? Now, the DB9 competed directly with the Porsche 911, the 997 generation, which in a lot of cases are well over $33,000 like this car was. And this car really is a true sports car. It's a proper two-seater, but it has a huge trunk. Look at the size of that trunk. So you've got a little partial shelf here, you've got a wide opening, and you've got the space behind the rear seats. So even though it's a very small and compact car, it holds a lot of stuff. There you go. That's how you convince your partner. It's basically a family car. What are some things you don't like about driving this car?
Nothing. There's nothing I don't like about driving this car, Tommy.
All right, I've got one. I haven't
what's
driven
that?
it, obviously.
Yeah.
But sitting in the passenger seat and feeling the shifter, it doesn't feel great, to be honest with you.
It's a little rubbery, I'll give you that.
It's pretty rubbery and then weirdly notchy at the actual shift point, so I think that was the downside of this car. And then I do think that, like, you know, I would like it to be like 10% quicker. I think that it...
And they did that following up
on the later ones.
Yeah, they made it quicker.
And then you get the Vantage S too.
Yeah.
So you expect it, at least I do, because this was my dream car when I was a kid, you expect it to be genuinely quick, and it does move, but it's not modern day quick. So
you know what the cherry on top with this car is? It's the fact that we bought it for $33,000, right? There's something about having a beautiful, sexy performance car that has a classic Coke bottle shape that people still stare at, and then knowing kind of secretly that you got this thing for less than the cost of a fully fitted out Camry or Accord. And
well, less than that.
Yeah.
Geez, the Camry Accord starts at like 36 now.
Exactly. Okay, all right, let me rephrase that. You got this at the cost of a fully baked Honda Civic. How about that?
There you go.
Yeah, and you know, that's a little secret that I carry in my heart as I drive this, and just gives me a lot of joy, because let's face it, I'm kind of cheap and I like finding bargains, and this is one hell of a bargain until it breaks.
Now, during its over 12-year lifespan, they built quite a few versions of the V8 Vantage, including the Coupe and the Roadster, the S Coupe and the S Roadster, the N400, the V8 Vantage GT Coupe and GT Roadster, the V12 Vantages, the GT12 Vantage, the GT8, the GTS, the AMR, the V6. I mean, they go on forever. And some of the special editions, especially the later ones, can be very expensive. But an early car like this in the US is genuinely relatively easy to find for under $40,000. And how could you not? Well, I can't apparently because I'm not allowed to drive it, but what an amazing automobile. We're going to hold on to this car for a number of months, live with it, drive with it, and find out if anything breaks or if it's as reliable as the experts say it is. Guys, this has been Tommy with TFL. Head over to alltfl.com. We got more videos coming.